Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about long-term memory. So remember we talked about the three components model, which is made up of sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. So this is the last of the memories involved in that. So long-term memory is really just a vast library of stored memories. And we will actually continue to form and store new memories until we die. So despite feeling at times, like maybe right now, that there's really no more space in your brain, there is always more space to learn and to store more memories. Now, long-term memory is split up into a few different types of memory. So first, we split long-term memory into declarative and procedural. And then declarative can also be separated into semantic memory and episodic memory. Now, this is just a nice diagram of kind of how things work, but don't worry, we'll go through each of these separately so that you fully understand what each is. So again, long-term memory is our library of memories. It's like, you can think of it as a library, you can think of it as a file cabinet, you can think of it as a hard drive. And this is durable storage of all past events and learned knowledge. Now, it's a very large storage capacity. Many people believe it's unlimited, but of course, this is really hard to test, right? And our long-term memory does endure for a lifetime, and it's always there. Now, some of you might ask, like, oh, what about, like, dementia? So dementia is really just the failure to retrieve these memories. So the memories are still there. You just aren't always able to retrieve them. So that's why we say they endure for a lifetime. Now, remember I said long-term memory can be split up. So the very first split we're going to do is into declarative memory versus procedural memory. So declarative memory can be verbalized. So this is when you're going to declare something, if you're going to say something. That's a declarative memory. Okay, so we call this an explicit memory. Now, a procedural memory is kind of the opposite. You can't really verbalize it. A procedural memory is usually memories about skills and actions. So like how to ride a bike. That would be a procedural memory. How to walk, that kind of thing. So we call these implicit memories. Now, again, remember declarative memory is things you can talk about. And so declarative memory will actually be split even further into two different types. We've got episodic memory and semantic memory. So episodic memory is memories about an episode. So a personal experience. For instance, what did you eat for dinner last night? What did you get for Christmas last year? Those are episodic memories where it's about a specific episode. Okay? A semantic memory is just general factual knowledge. So really anything else. So when you're taking an exam, what you're recalling is semantic memories. Your general factual knowledge. So if I say, what's the capital of Canada? Now, of course, it took me moving to Canada to realize it's Ottawa, not Toronto. But, you know, us Americans, we don't know a lot. But now I know that. So that's a semantic memory. Okay, so this could also be like if I asked you what part of the brain is involved in memory. Right? Now remember the first one we talked about was the hippocampus. So that would be a semantic general knowledge memory. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. Now, we have all these memories. I said they can endure for a lifetime. But sometimes we get damage. And damage can cause us to have disrupted memories or lose some memories altogether. And this is usually due to traumatic brain injury. okay? Now, when we talk about damage to long-term memory, we split that into two different types of damage. And so when we have a loss of memory, we call that amnesia. So that's this word here. So amnesia means a loss of memory, okay? And then we have anterograde and retrograde amnesia, so two different types. So anterograde amnesia means that you have lost the ability to assimilate and retain new knowledge. In other words, what anterograde amnesia does is it prevents memories from moving into long-term memory, okay? So any knowledge that you get or anything like that, it will go into our sensory memory, to our short-term memory, but then it will go away because we've lost the connection, we've lost the ability to store our memories or store this knowledge into long-term memory. Now, the opposite of anterograde amnesia is retrograde amnesia. So here I want you to think of retro, right? Things that are retro are old. Oh, that was weird. So retrograde amnesia is the loss of memory for events that have happened in the past. Okay? So it's really the loss of the ability to recall our memories. So we're not able to get the memories out of long-term memory and back into that working memory. So that's what retrograde amnesia does. Now, I have a few fun examples. If you guys have seen these movies, they are pretty old, but they're very good movies. I would highly recommend. So the first one for anterograde amnesia, you could think of it in the movie Memento. It's from 2000. Again, great movie. If you need a little bit of a break from studying, maybe watch a movie and you'll, kind of understand anterograde amnesia. And then for retrograde amnesia, you can think of The Bourne Identity. He wakes up and he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know how he got there, all of that. So he lost his memory for events in the past. That's retrograde amnesia. So then we have this thing called dissociation. So dissociation are short-term and is talking about whether short-term and long-term memory are two different systems. So if they are two different systems, then that means that you can impair one type while the other one still functions. And so this is an idea that we really believe in. And that there's different systems that control these, and we've figured this out due to some case studies. Now, if you remember all the way back to chapter 2, we talked about what a case study is. So a case study is kind of like an experiment, but it's more observational, and it's only including one participant. So the most famous of the case studies when studying memory is with a guy called HM. So HM, I have a really cool video about it in the notes here. If you look in the notes section of the slides, then you'll see a YouTube video link, and it talks about HM. So for a long time, we didn't know what HM's name really was because obviously it's confidential, right? Think about the ethics. But he's since passed away, and we now know that his name was Henry Mollison. And what happened was that HM, he had epilepsy. And it was so bad that the doctors decided to do what's called a bilateral temporal lobectomy. So pretty much what they're going to do is on both sides, that's what bilateral means, so both sides, they're going to remove the temporal section. So this is the temporal lobe right here, right? We know that. Well, instead of removing all of it, then they only remove part of it. And the part of the lobe that they removed included the hippocampus, the amygdala, as well as some other cortices, like the entorhinal cortice, which we didn't talk about, but some of you guys might recognize that name. But pretty much it removed a large portion of his brain. So you can see the before and the after. There's just huge holes where parts of his brain used to be. Now, after the surgery, what we saw was that he had major anterograde amnesia. So he could not form any new memories. So a few psychologists went to study him because obviously it's very interesting. The most notable is this lovely woman right here. This is Brenda Milner, Dr. Brenda Milner, and she's Canadian. In my personal opinion, she is a fantastic psychologist, and I think she's amazing. She's one of my heroes. So there's a little excerpt on her in your textbook if you want to read up on it. But what they found was that HM has normal performance on assessments of intellectual ability. So his short-term memory worked great. He had good word stores. If we did that word test where you give him a list of words and then you ask him to tell them back to you, he did great on it. He had no problem. So he had normal performance on our working memory test. So again, he could recall previously given numbers as well as control subjects. So his short-term and working memory still were working great. So that's very interesting because he has anterograde amnesia. So what that's telling us is that anterograde amnesia is really only affecting that long-term memory, not the short-term, right? So it's also telling us that the working memory doesn't require that part of the brain. It doesn't require the hippocampus, the medial temporal structures of the brain. It also is what helps show us that declarative memory and procedural memory are different systems. So remember, declarative memories are things that we can say, and procedural memories are things that we do. And how we figured this out is that when we gave HM some declarative memory tasks, he wasn't able to do them. But if we asked him to do procedural memory tasks, he did great. So for some reason, the anterograde amnesia only affected his declarative memory, but not the procedural memory. And so again, that helps show us that they're different systems. And so he also taught us that the medial temporal structures are important in the formation of semantic and episodic long-term memory. So again, those are those two types of declarative memories. So HM was a very important case study. Again, there's a lot of really cool videos about him on YouTube if you want to learn more. You can see them doing the actual test with him. I would highly recommend it. It's very interesting. Now, the next case study we're going to talk about is someone called KF. So KF was in a motorcycle accident. Wasn't wearing his helmet, guys. Wear a helmet. But his motorcycle accident damaged his left parietal occipital region. So you can see over here, right where it hit. And the left parietal is usually involved in the language and mathematics, right? And what we saw was that KF had a damaged short-term memory. So he only had a digit span of 2. So he could only remember 2 items at a time. So remember, it's usually 7 plus or minus 2, and he only got 2. However, his long-term memory was intact. So he could still recall anything, and he could still form new memories aside from things that were damaged by the short-term memory. So what did KF teach us? So he taught us that long-term memory does not require a functioning short-term memory to encode new information. So again, even though his short-term memory was damaged, he could still form new memories, which was very interesting. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is another very interesting case study. Again, there's some great videos about him on YouTube. I put another link down below here. And this is a guy called Clive Wearing. So Clive was a British musician and composer. And unfortunately, he got sick and there was a virus that attacked his central nervous system. And he experienced some significant hippocampus damage as well as damage in other parts of his brain as well. And unfortunately for Clive, he experienced both anterograde and retrograde amnesia. So that means not only can he not form new memories, but he also cannot recall his past memories. But what we found is that Clive can learn new tasks. So while he can't form new episodic memories, he can still form new procedural memories. So procedural memories, remember, are implicit or unconscious, and they're a form of long-term memories, right? And so repeated exposures allows the performance of tasks without the need of a conscious control or attention. In other words, what we saw is that, so Clive was a musician, and so if you put a new piece of, say, piano music in front of him, he would sit there and say, I've never seen this before, I've never played this song before. And the first time he would play it, might make a few mistakes. And then the next day, or even 10 minutes later, you could leave the room, come back in, and he will have forgotten you. And so you give him the exact same piece of music, and he will again tell you, I've never seen this piece of music before, I've never played it before, I've never heard it. But when he goes to play it, he's going to play it even better than the first time, because he still was able to learn and form a procedural memory for that task, even though consciously he has no memory of this. And so that's what Clive really taught us, was that the different amnesias, the anterograde and retrograde, tend to really focus on those episodic memories, and that procedural memories seem to be stored in a different part of the brain. They do not seem to be stored in the hippocampus. Very interesting, guys. So here's kind of just a little table of what we learned. So Clive Wearing, he had short-term memory, did not have long-term, whereas KF did not have short-term memory, but still had long-term memory. So what these two together are showing us is that you can have one intact while the other one's not intact, and they don't rely on each other. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about with long-term memory is how to remember lists. Okay, because remember, we talked about lists a little bit with short-term memory, but a lot of lists are really dependent on the long-term memory. So when remembering lists, then there's a few different effects that we see. So the first one is called serial position effect, and this describes the relationship between a word's position in a list and its probability of recall. In other words, if I gave you a list of words and I gave your friend the exact same list but in a different order, I can predict that each of you will remember different words. And I can do that because of this serial position effect. And so the first effect is called the primacy effect, where it's easier to remember things at the beginning of the list. So the closer something is to the beginning, the more likely you are to remember it. So again, if I give you a list of 20 words, and the first 3 words on your list is dog, dinosaur, cat, I can predict you're going to remember those 3 words more than the words after them. Now, if I give the exact same list to your friend, but those words are mixed up in the middle, I can predict they're not going to remember those words as well. And that's what the primacy effect says. Now, the recency effect is that it's easier to remember the things you've encountered most recently. In other words, the things at the end of the list. So again, with your 20-word list, your first 3 was dog, dinosaur, cat. And then there's a bunch in the middle, and then say the last three are lemur, llama, lion. You're probably going to remember those three the most as compared to the ones in the middle. And that's the recency effect. Now again, if your friend has a different last three words, they're going to remember those last words more than the words you remembered. Okay? So here's just a graphical representation of kind of how that happens. So if we give someone a list of 15 words, so that's what's on the x-axis, is the 15 words, and then we're measuring how accurate they are. Then in purple, if we test someone immediately after they hear these words, then what we can see is they remember the first few words a lot easier, and then they kind of drop off, and then they remember the last three words really well. So we see this U-shaped distribution, where they remember the first couple good and the last couple good, but the ones in the middle aren't so great. But that's only if we test immediately. If we delay the testing, even by 30 seconds or a minute, then what we see is that the primacy effect is still strong. They'll still remember the first few words, but then we drop off and we never regain it. So if you delay testing, you no longer see recency effect. So if you test immediately, you see this U-shaped effect with both primacy and recency. If you delay, you see kind of a lounge, kind of looks like a lounge to me, or a giant L form shape, where you see primacy but no recency. So that's it for long-term memory. Please let me know if you have any questions.